Hello, today's program is focused on how to get off to a great start as a new manager. Whether you're coming in from an outside organization or have been newly promoted into a management role, I'm sure you're really interested in some tips and techniques for making sure that your initial experience goes as smoothly as possible and that you enjoy long-term success in your new role. You will find that a lot of today's presentation focuses on the medical school's competency model, which applies to all positions and has a special competency that's focused on those who have supervisory responsibility. And the competency is called management and leadership, and we'll be getting into that in some detail as we go forward. My name is Brian Carroll. I'm Director of Organizational Development, and I'll be your guide as we go through our tips and techniques today. I'm going to start by summarizing some of the most important things as you get started, and I'll say a few things about each. Probably most important and most challenging for many managers is being clear with your staff about what you expect of them. Unfortunately, I routinely hear from managers that some or a few of their employees are not meeting up to that manager's expectations. And typically, I will then ask that manager, well, what are your expectations? And often that question is responded to with silence or a bunch of generalities. The fact is that if you aren't clear with yourself about what you expect, it's going to be very hard for your employees to know what you expect of them. And so one of the things I would recommend that you do early on is do an exercise where you write down some of your core expectations for people who are reporting to you. The second thing is to get to know your people. Management, when done well, and certainly leadership, are really interpersonal activities. If you are a good manager, you adapt your style to other people's personal styles rather than using a one-size-fits-all strategy. It's important that you know important policies and processes that are in place at the medical school or in your strategic business unit and department. Those are going to be important elements for you to guide you in how you're going to manage day-to-day activities. Listening. Probably one of the most important skills really good managers have is they're able to listen well, both to individual conversations and also in group conversations and meetings. We'll ask you to support the competency model that I've alluded to a couple of different times so far. If you look closely at that document, you will see that the leadership and management competency focuses primarily on how you coach, mentor, and develop and delegate to your staff members, and we'll talk more about this as we go on. We expect you to respond quickly to problems before they grow. One of the biggest mistakes that a manager can make is to see something that concerns them and develop the belief that it will go away by itself. We expect you to be a role model. We can't expect employees to exhibit behaviors that you don't exhibit yourself. An important principle is what gets rewarded gets repeated. There's an old saying that really good managers catch their employees doing something right. Anytime you see something that appears to align with or exceed your expectations, it's worth noting. And then finally, all managers who really become proficient at leadership and management understand that this is a journey that doesn't really have a completion point, and it's important to continue your learning in a variety of ways. In this next slide, you'll see the elements of the leadership and management competency that I've alluded to so far. As I said a couple of minutes ago, you will note that virtually all of the elements of the competencies really have to do with your relationship with your employees and how you help them focus on the important objectives that your department has, as well as help them develop to be the very best that they can be. There are 8 elements to the model, and we will be going over each and some skills related to each one as we go forward. The first element focuses on how a manager has a responsibility to be clear about what the priorities, goals, and expectations are for the department, and that a manager provides timely, constructive, and balanced feedback in holding all staff members accountable for day-to-day performance. Here are 3 skills that you should consider focusing on as you get started. One is helping your staff formulate and execute SMART goals. I won't spend a lot of time talking about the elements of the SMART model, but I will say a couple of things about it, and that is that the best goals and the ones that are likely to be achieved and to be mutually aligned between the expectations of the manager and an employee are really specific, they're measurable, and they're time-bound. If you have those elements, you know you're on the right track. Second thing is to be, as I said earlier, able to articulate what you expect of each employee in terms of his or her day-to-day behavior and performance. And then finally, developing the capacity to give feedback. And by the way, that includes critical feedback. One of the most important things that we do as managers is really help employees who may be struggling get back on track. And we do ourselves, the employee, and the organization a disservice when we avoid that because it might be uncomfortable. Another element is the ability to delegate and empower people to make decisions and flex your style to adapt to different people's preferences and styles and understand individual differences and group dynamics. One of the most objectionable things that a manager can do is micromanage. It is objectionable to employees, and frankly, in the modern working world, where people are engaged in complex activities and where you may have quite a few direct reports, it's impractical. What we really want is a situation where we develop a trust in our employees to do their best work and the right thing routinely without us having to look over that person's shoulder. Second thing is we, as I said before, don't want you to use a one-size-fits-all approach. The very best managers understand that each person is different and responds to different ways of interacting with them. And then finally, because many times you'll be working with teams and in meetings, we would like you to become observant and proficient in responding to various types of team dynamics. So this next one is probably one of the most challenging for many managers. When we are honest with ourselves, many of us find that it is uncomfortable to have to engage in conversations that involve potential conflicts. The avoidant manager, frankly, is often one of the worst types of managers, someone who allows things to fester, and often problems, if left unattended, only grow in magnitude. Here are 5 skills that you should be interested in developing that will help you when you are dealing with potentially conflict situations. The first is knowing about policies and how to apply them effectively to different types of situations. The second is developing comfort with conflict. No one typically relishes conflict, but if you approach it directly over time, your ease of responding to it will grow. The third is recognizing the signs and responding quickly and effectively to either individual performance problems or unhealthy group dynamics within your team. Part of responding is applying appropriate performance counseling and corrective action when appropriate. There are a lot of tools and resources available to do that, as well as additional training that we offer. And also, we have a whole team of people in human resources that focus on employee relations and are there to help managers who may be asked to deal with challenging interpersonal situations on their team. And then finally, becoming proficient in mediating disputes between team members. Because people are different, it is inevitable that there will be conflicts between people. That is not necessarily a bad sign, but just a sign of individual differences. And conflicts can be mediated and handled in a way that allow parties to feel respected and decisions to be reached. One of our most important expectations, and one that you may not be entirely familiar with at this point, is the expectation that we really work on helping our employees develop. We are not just interested in them doing their core jobs day after day, week after week, year after year with proficiency. We really have an obligation and a wish as part of our core values to help people grow and increase their skills and their confidence in those skills. Your role as a manager can be an opportunity to really help people with those issues. One of the most important things you can do is to incorporate career and educational development as elements of your conversations with employees when you're having your regular one-on-ones with those employees. As you should know by now, it is our expectations that each manager does meet individually with employees on some sort of regular basis. And so it's not just about the employees increasing their ability to achieve the operational objectives of your department. We also want to engage people in talking about their aspirations and how we can support those. It's very important to do that, both because it's the right thing to do, and secondly, it's an important tool with respect to retention and employee engagement. When we look at what helps people feel engaged at work and want to continue working in an organization, we find that those meetings with managers and the support of the manager are very important. Finally, we encourage you to encourage your staff members to participate in the growing number of learning and professional development opportunities that are available through the University of Massachusetts Medical School. You have probably noticed that over the last couple of years, we have increased the number of offerings that are available to our employees on site, and we're in the process of launching an online learning management system that will increase that even further. So we expect you as a manager to help your employees become acquainted with what is offered and also to support them in attending those, and then also helping employees develop the skills that they may learn from their attendance. Parenthetically, I'd also mention that we have quite a lot of offerings now that are available to managers like yourself, of which this is one, and these are designed to help you increase the skills that we've talked about so far. It is increasingly true in most work settings that people need to collaborate in order to achieve important organizational objectives. One of your responsibilities as a manager is to help encourage and foster those sorts of activities. You can and should be looking at how you can encourage teamwork, how you can provide opportunities for individual staff members to be part of group projects and initiatives. And then finally, that you give each staff person an opportunity to be successful within the context of a team environment and where you publicly acknowledge and reward top performance. In most cases, your department will have goals and objectives that are immediate and real time that you're focused on a day-to-day basis. If you are thinking strategically, you'll also be focusing on the time ahead and be thinking about longer-term goals and objectives, as well as responding to current and anticipated changes in your environment or in your arena of work. Really good managers think both strategically and tactically, and also engage the staff in forecasting and focusing on how you can maintain continued excellence in a changing environment. We've all heard that old saying, "Do as I say, not as I do." Unfortunately, there are some managers who do behave that way and unfortunately suffer the consequences. As a manager, you are in a fishbowl and you are under scrutiny and observation by your staff on a day-to-day basis. Wherever there are inconsistencies between what you say to them and how you behave yourself, they will note that, and it may diminish your effectiveness as a manager as well as your credibility. Therefore, we expect that on a day-to-day basis, you live the other core competencies and that you continue to show an optimism and energy about what your department does and where it's going. It's okay to have private doubts, it's okay to have a bad day, but to the extent you can not display those things publicly, it will contribute to your credibility and your performance as a manager. So let me give you some good news and some bad news, or as I might call it, challenging news. The good news is that your team can produce remarkable results when you have aligned them, when they are aware and committed to the goals of the organization and to the department, and that you will achieve much greater things together than you could alone. The more challenging news, and this is something that many new managers struggle with, is your team's performance is not under your control. You can influence it by inspiring, guiding, coaching, and showing good leadership, but ultimately you cannot control it. Ultimately, the performance of the team is the responsibility of each member on the team and not in the sole responsibility of the manager. All of the really good managers and leaders that I've ever known have one characteristic in common that I'd like to talk about for the next few minutes, and that is they really are aware of themselves and they try to be as authentic as possible. So knowing themselves and then using that self-knowledge in day-to-day behavior. In other words, they don't try to be something that they are not. You can begin by reflecting on what kind of a manager you want to be. You may want to think about what your own style is going to be and how to be most comfortable. One of the biggest mistakes that people can make is try to come up with some sort of model that really just doesn't fit their own personalities. You may want to reflect in your previous experience what sort of leaders and managers you have had and what sorts of behaviors have resonated best with employees and what sorts of elements have been objectionable or irritating to employees. Think of your purpose. Why are you a manager? What do you hope to get out of it, and what do you hope to convey? What things have you learned based on your values that will help you as you proceed in working with employees? And then finally, how you can most visibly display your own values and priorities to your employees. I'm very aware that some of you may have very large teams. Even with that being the case, to the extent possible, it's really good to get to know people as individuals. We've already talked about how it's important to adapt your style to different preferences and other people's styles. You really can't do that if you don't know very much about the people who are reporting to you. It's really good to get a sense both of what people enjoy about their job, what they don't like, what skills they bring to the table, what maybe untapped work experience and skills that they may have that right now are dormant. As I said earlier, where they hope to grow their career. And then get a sense of what sorts of management styles really work for them and don't work for them. Early on, I talked about the importance of reflecting on and being aware of and being able to communicate your expectations. That's going to be a cornerstone of your approach. One of the things you'll want to be thinking about is what success looks like for each of the people reporting to you. How will you communicate that? It's often a really important thing that a manager can do to take aspirational principles and translate them into day-to-day behavior so each employee understands what success looks like, not just in terms of overall statements, but ground level day-to-day behavior. You should be thinking about how you're going to use those one-on-ones that we talked about. That's probably your most important opportunity to both listen and also to provide coaching and guidance. And then finally, you should be thinking about how you can be clear about what you expect from employees on a day-to-day basis. The clearer and more succinct you can be, the better. One manager that I knew early on had only two expectations. He expected people reporting to him to get things done, and secondly, to get along with people. And when you think about it, those two succinct statements really capture a lot. Some of you may have heard about something called the primacy effect. Primacy effect comes from social psychology, and what it suggests is that whenever we're exposed to a new person or a new experience, the information that we get about that person or experience early on is going to have the most powerful influence on what we ultimately think about that person or experience. A shorter way of expressing that is that if you can get off to a great start early on, it's going to pay off long term. So, here are some things that you can do in your first month as a manager that can set a foundation for future success. In the first month, you want to make sure that you have at least one staff meeting. Where possible, you want to fix some low-hanging fruit issues. In any department, even ones that are troubled and challenged, there are usually some things that a new manager can do early on that will help set a tone that things are going to be different and can help build morale and confidence in that leader. As I said earlier, don't try to do it all yourself and don't micromanage. Delegate things to people. Give people things to do. Delegation is not about offloading your work. It's about distributing work in a way that demonstrates that you have confidence in the people who report to you. Set goals early on. People do not like to feel like they are in limbo, and so having a direction will really help people develop more comfort and confidence in you as a leader. It's really important to stick up for your people. One of the most important things that a manager can do is set good boundaries with other people and departments outside of your own department, and wherever possible, to make sure that you are putting the interests of the people who report to you front and center. Showing an openness to feedback. Feedback is one of the most important things that will help you succeed. And unfortunately, we have a tendency as humans to sometimes filter out or avoid even trying to find out about things that might be negative. It's important to get those things out on the table and deal with them. And then finally, you're going to want to make sure that during your first month, you want to have one-on-ones with every person in your area, or at very least with your direct reports. The following are a list of suggested questions that you might use in a first staff meeting. I'm by no means suggesting that you ask all of them, but some of these may be very pertinent and useful in getting conversation going and helping people begin expressing themselves and trusting you. They probably do want to know about you. They may want to convey some information about the team and its history and its aspirations. They may wish to convey to you some ideas of current hot-button issues or problems or challenges. They may want to give you some feedback on how you can be most successful in working with the team. Having said all that, don't be surprised if in a first meeting people are relatively quiet. They may be just trying to assess you and may be reticent about speaking up for a variety of reasons. That's okay, as long as you open the doors for people to speak up. And when some of the more courageous people do speak up, you really acknowledge their courage in breaking the ice and getting two-way conversations going. Here's some questions that you might bring up in your individual one-on-ones. And again, I'm not suggesting that in a one-on-one you would have an opportunity to cover all these topics, but here are some of the ones that typically resonate the most with people in an initial one-on-one. You can and should ask people about their current job. You want to ask them about the barriers to their success. One of the most important things that any good manager does is help people clear away obstacles. When you think about why people leave jobs, some of your best and brightest people will leave if they feel like they cannot be successful, if there are elements that are getting in the way routinely of their doing as good a job as they want to do. And then finally, it's really good to get a sense of how they view the management role. What sorts of things really are helpful to them and what sorts of things may get in the way. I haven't mentioned this one so far because we've primarily focused on the relationship between you and your employees. Obviously, you as a manager have a manager, and when you're new in your role, it's really important to work with him or her to get clear about your own manager's expectations. If you are unfamiliar with that person, if you haven't worked with them ever before, it's really good to make sure that you understand what their key goals and objectives are, what ways in which they prefer the two of you to communicate, what things they would like you to put at the top of your list in terms of things that you will be focused on, and also to get some sense of what things don't work for them, pet peeves, things that are irritants, things that they see as unproductive. And then finally, to really talk about how, when, and why you should be delivering feedback to the manager. You want to make sure, wherever possible, that you are aligned with your manager's expectations for you. If you've had detailed conversations in one-on-ones over the first couple of months, chances are you will get answers to all the questions that are listed here. And again, I'm not going to go over each one individually, but it's important to make sure that you are clear about the responsibilities you will have, which ones are most important, what things lie outside of your area of responsibility, and then also if there are deadlines or deliverables that are immediately upcoming versus ones that may be long-term. Anyone who becomes proficient as a leader and manager is aware of their environment and considers the notion of stakeholders. Stakeholders are individuals and groups who have a stake, as the name suggests, in what your department does. Really good managers think about that a lot, because if you're only focused on a narrow range, if you're just focused, for example, internally on your own employees, you may miss opportunities and challenges related to outside departments and groups. So when you think about stakeholders, think of them in two basic branches. One is external. Do you have customers or clients, patients, subjects? What do those folks expect from your department? What is their history with your department? How can you maintain an active connection with them? Some of the most thorny organizational problems that I've encountered have arisen when a manager has failed to sufficiently consider what an outside stakeholder may wish or want from that department, or when there's been a history of some problematic occurrences. So, in order for you to have optimal situational and environmental awareness, you're going to want to really think about those external stakeholders. The other branch are those internal. It's almost unheard of in today's organizational world that there is a department or area that functions in isolation. It's almost always the case that you are going to have to collaborate with different individuals and departments inside the organization in order to be successful. You need to know who those people and departments are, who the people are that you can develop connections with, especially people who are at a peer level? And then what sort of styles and working arrangements will allow optimal communication and collaboration between you and your department and those other people and their departments? So, as we get closer to wrapping up, I want to just tackle 3 myths that tend to cause distress for new managers. And my intention in doing this is to really relieve you of some unreasonable expectations you may have for yourself and your performance. The first one I've already touched on, and that is that the outcomes that you produce and the atmosphere in your department are solely under your control. You have significant influence, but there are a lot of other elements that go into it. Really good managers develop teams that understand that they are all responsible individually and collectively for performance and the atmosphere in the department. Second is that because you have a new title and role, that will automatically give you the credibility you need to be successful. Part of that is true. That will give you a good head start. But ultimately, as I have conveyed throughout this presentation, success is about relationships. Ultimately, it's about how you establish your credibility, your authenticity, your expertise, and how much your team and others come to respect you and understand that you treat them with respect in return. The third is that you need to control your people. I've already talked a lot about the perils of micromanagement. In a knowledge-based organization like the medical school, we have a lot of people who are highly educated, highly skilled. They do not want or need someone leaning over their shoulder. What they do want is support to be successful and the sort of coaching that will allow them to continue to develop. The fourth, and this is especially thorny sometimes for people who have been promoted from within a peer group to manage that group. And it can be challenging, and that is that you need to be friends with your staff. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have a completely businesslike and aloof stance towards your staff. That's not desirable either. You can be friendly. You can engage in social interaction, but it's really important that you maintain some boundaries around how you work with your staff. Finally, one of the easiest and fastest ways to drive yourself crazy in your new role is to establish the self-expectation that it is your responsibility to make sure that everything always runs smoothly at all times. The reality is that in all modern organization, there will be unanticipated events that come up. There will be things, no matter how diligent you are, that will arise that you will have to deal with. All you can do is make sure that you're doing your very best on a day-to-day basis. Before talking about some resources that are available to you and wrapping up, I just want to briefly highlight 6 tips that I have found in my career coaching new managers have proven to be helpful as you get started. The first is to understand that your relationships with peers can and will change if you've been promoted from among them. And even though it can and will change, it doesn't mean that it has to be negative. It's just a new type of relationship. And again, as long as you're clear about expectations and maintain good boundaries, you can be successful and maintain those relationships, albeit in a different type of way. The second tip is to make sure you use HR when appropriate. They have a variety of things that are available to you, both training and individual support, to help you be successful in your new role. The third is to make sure that you do have those one-on-ones, and that's going to be one of your best ways to understand what's really going on and also to develop those very crucial relationships that I've talked about throughout this presentation. I talked before about how being a manager means being in a fishbowl. It's really important to be aware not only of your behavior, but how your behavior appears to others. It's always important to make sure that you're thinking about how you're treating people. And one of the basic principles that I always use, and it sounds almost too simple to mention, but use the golden rule. When you think about your own experience as an employee, think about how you have been treated or how you wish to be treated, and then replicate how you wish to be treated. Understand that as a manager, you really can't get involved in gossip, venting negative feelings to your employees. That really should be something that stays off stage. We all need to blow off steam at times. That's a human characteristic we all have, and frankly, it's a necessary thing to do. Just don't do it with your employees. And then finally, it's really important to reflect on the fact that when you've been promoted into manager role, especially from within the same department, that you really think about each of the people who you now will be supporting and supervising, and understanding and reflecting on how your previous experience with those employees might influence how you react to them now. In these next two slides, we've put some links to some really important resources that you may wish to use as a manager, and I'll talk a little bit about each one now. I've talked about the importance of being aware of policies. Happily, all human resources policies are housed in the same place, and you can find them if you follow that first link. In a related manner, you may have a variety of forms that you need to use related to policies. They are in a similar location. I talked earlier about how when employees may be struggling or maybe having difficulty achieving what you expect them to do, that we have an employee relations department who will definitely be able to provide you with guidance and coaching that can help you when you have to address those issues. Most employees, when you think about it, are often concerned about pay-related issues. There's a compensation department that has, again, a variety of online resources as well as individual consultation available to you, and you should avail yourself of that when you need to. There are a variety of other topics that are of interest to your employees. They may ask you about your benefits. If the person is an employee coming from a different country, they may have questions that are best addressed by our immigration services people. We have a learning and development department. I talked earlier about how our managers are expected to help people grow professionally, and we have an expanding number of courses, both live and online, that are ready for the use of our employees. You should feel free to look in on that regularly to see what's there. And then finally, if you supervise people who are in one of our unions, there may be particular policies and guidance that you need to know about that specifically relate to people who are in those unions. This concludes today's presentation. I know I've covered a great deal of material here, and I hope you will make copies of this to use for your own growth and development as a manager. Likewise, I hope you will follow some of the links that I focused on in the last couple of slides and understand that the Human Resources Department is always available to you as a manager. We really do understand the importance of your role in terms of supporting the success of the medical school, and we want to make sure that we always give you whatever sort of resources you may need to be successful.